Hello guys, gals, non-binary pals, and waterfowls. It's me, Big Mike, and I'm coming at you with another Big Mike's life advice video. It's that time of year again when people start to consider making certain lifestyle changes. And one such change that people often consider making is getting into reading. As both an avid reader and an advocate of reading in both my personal and professional life, I am often asked how to get into reading. So I decided to make this video with the hope that maybe it can help someone out there get into reading. In addition to sharing tips for getting into reading, I'm also sharing some of my favorite tips for reading, as well as for developing a reading before bedtime habit. Most of these are tips I've been giving out as advice for years, though there are a few here that I stumbled across while writing this video. And before we get into talking about these tips, I just want to let you lovely guys, gals, non-binary pals, and waterfowls know that I do have a Ko-fi account, and for the time being, anything I receive on Ko-fi will go towards helping me to build a new PC or to buy a better PC. And regardless, it would give me a better machine. And having a better machine will allow me to improve the quality of my videos, will allow me to make different kinds of videos, and maybe even be able to collaborate with some of my friends who are streamers. But if you can't or you don't want to, I completely understand. Money's tight and times are hard for many people. I just love the very fact that you're here. But if you'd like to make a donation to my channel, A, it would greatly help, and B, you can find a link below in the description. Without further ado, let's jump into talking about some reading tips, fam. So to start off with, I want to share my tips for developing a reading habit. So first, find out why you want to read. Having a will to read is important, but having a reason behind that will is even more so. Maybe you want to learn. Maybe you're trying to be more educated or more cultured. Perhaps you're looking for some escapism, or maybe you're a writer. As a writer, it's very important that you read a lot. So if you want to write a novel, it's very important that you read a lot of novels. If you want to write poetry, for example, it's very important that you read a lot of poetry. Next, choose something that you're interested in, and don't try to force yourself to read something you aren't. Later on, once you have your routine established, then you can challenge yourself. But for the time being, because we're trying to establish this habit, you want to make sure that you choose something that you are genuinely interested in. Try rereading an old favorite. Maybe when you were in school in your literature class, maybe you had to read a book or a poem or something you really enjoyed. If that's the case, maybe rereading such a text might be a great way to start. Now also, don't force yourself to read books that you just can't seem to get into. You might pick up a book that you're interested in, but when you come to read it, it just doesn't grab your attention. It just doesn't speak to you. So if you are not enjoying it, stop reading and find something else. Again, the philosophy here is that we're trying to find something that you're interested in, something that grabs your attention. Because as we're going to discuss later on, that pleasure is going to be a very, very big part. That interest is going to be a very, very big part in helping to develop your habit. The next tip I like to give is start small. You don't have to read a lot, maybe just a chapter, a half a chapter, or even a page a day. The important thing is that whatever you choose, whatever amount you decide on, you need to set that as a mandatory amount for you to read every day. Now choose a time that works best for you. Now here, there's no one size fits all, no right or wrong, but you just need to find a time that fits best for you. And this may take some experimentations. When I first started my habit, I played around with it a bit. Sometimes I would read in the morning, sometimes in the evening. Now I find the afternoon to be the best for me. Likewise, work with whatever format that you like. It doesn't matter if it's a physical book, if it's a PDF, or you're using your Kindle. That doesn't matter, whatever you feel comfortable with. And don't let anybody shame you for having a preference that's not mainstream. Now I want to share some of my more advanced tips for establishing a reading habit. And first of these is what I called, or what's commonly called, habit bonding. So try to tie your reading habit to a habit you already have, preferably one you enjoy. As humans, pleasure and pain are great forces to utilize in conditioning. If you can tie something you want to turn into a habit to a habit you already find pleasure in, it can help it to stick. And even more so, some of that pleasure could rub off on your new habit that you're trying to start. I'll give you a great example of this. In the afternoons, I tend to enjoy a cup of ginger and turmeric tea. So I decided that when I wanted to start reading more, I would read during tea time. Now, I can hardly do one without thinking about the other. Reading has become much a part of my tea time as the tea itself. Now, maybe you like coffee, for example. And so maybe, for example, you could put your book close to your coffee. So when you make your coffee in the morning, you could read your book. So you tie your reading to your coffee habit. Now, another advanced technique I like to recommend, and one I found to be very useful, is to ask questions about your reading. What are you hoping to learn? For example, if we're reading a book on psychology, and specifically the introductory chapter, maybe you might ask, what is psychology? Where did it come from? How long has it been around? And we can also ask these questions or ask similar questions in regards to narrative-based books too. For example, who's the main character? What happens when they do X? Etc. Now, as you read, you can answer these questions. Now, you don't have to answer all of them, and you may not even find an answer to every question. And that's okay. These questions serve only to motivate us, to get us to ask questions, to raise our curiosity, and curiosity is a great motivator. Another good technique here is to set goals for yourself. Now, I put this with the advanced because this can be quite difficult, because this can require you to be realistic, but also being honest with yourself as well. And this is what I mean by this. If last year you didn't even read one book, it's going to be very unrealistic for you to set a goal of reading one book a week. Instead, maybe you could set a goal like 5 pages a day or a chapter a day. But to do this, you're going to have to know yourself, and you're going to have to be honest with yourself and be realistic with what you want to do. And lastly, as a last resort effort, if all else fails, you can try what's called reading sprints. This is when you set a timer for an amount of time, and you can choose any amount of time, and you decide to read until the timer goes off. And if you find yourself hooked and engaged, you can continue to read past the timer, and if not, you can try again the next day. And these are my tips for establishing a reading habit. So now I want to share with you some of my tips for once you've established your habit and you're well into reading. And I'm going to start with my favorite, and this is starting a reading journal. Now, one of my biggest regrets in life is that I've not been a good journaler, in regards to my personal life. But one thing I have done an excellent job, I believe, is keeping a reading journal. And so what I would do is, for every day I read, I'll put down the date, and I'll put down the title of what I'm reading. I'll log quotes that really stick out to me, or points of interest in the text that stick out to me. And I will jot down any notes that come to my mind, any thoughts or reflections I may have on the text. And one really big thing for me is that I'll jot down any cross-references, especially to related texts or texts that have a similar message, or maybe something I could compare it to. Now, this next one has been another very powerful one for me. Reread books you've read in the past that you fell in love with, your favorites. One thing that's really surprised me is going back and revisiting texts and books that I read when I was younger. And revisiting such texts in different phases and different times in your life can give you very different experiences. I'll give you a good example of this. There's a very famous story of a young man who got kidnapped and sold into slavery in the ancient world. And his father worried very much about him. But throughout his life, he went on many adventures. He was attracted to many hot women, and because of his handsomeness, many hot women were attracted to him. He was in a foreign country, and as a young man who dreamed of traveling and dreamed of wooing the hearts of many exotic women, I really loved his character. But as I've gotten older and went back and reread this, as a father now, I really deeply sympathize more with the father. And that's just one example of how your life experience can affect how you view books you love. So I always recommend go back and revisit your old books that you love. books in a lot of ways are like friends. It's always good to catch up with them every now and then. Now, many people struggle with building focus, and one very good way we can do that is by physical exercise. And I know it might sound a bit strange, they might sound like they're not connected, but physical exercise and regular exercise does great wonders for our cognitive abilities. And not only will it give you discipline, but it will also help you to stay focused. So if you're having trouble focusing on your reading, you might want to try that. And also, on a related note, you can challenge yourself with more difficult books now. So in the first part, I mentioned that you should hold off on trying to read books that you're not really into. But now that you have your habit established, you can challenge yourself now. You can read those classics that everybody talks about, but maybe you're not so much interested in. Or you can try to read books that you feel like may be above your level. Now, not only would this help to challenge you as a person, but it can improve how you handle simpler books. After spending time with these more difficult books, you may find it easier to breeze through the more simpler ones. And one thing I want to stress out here is that it's okay to spend longer periods of time on some books than others. So here we're going for quality of time spent over the quantity of books. It's better to read only 2 or 3 books in a year that had a huge impact on you or you can remember greatly, as opposed to reading 10 or 20 that you can't recall anything important from. And lastly, by challenging yourself with reading these more difficult books, this too can help to build your focus. So when you go back to read the simpler books, you may find that your focus with them has greatly improved. And these are some of my favorite tips for after you've already established your reading habit. Now lastly, I want to share with you all my tips for establishing a reading habit before bed. Now if you are wanting to start a reading habit before bed, this is going to require a bit of a different approach. And this is a habit I myself just recently developed. So here when you're selecting a book, you want to make sure you're interested in it, but not too interested in it. You're going to want to avoid a page turner, otherwise you run a risk of not being able to sleep. You're also not going to want to read something that's too heavy, or something that's going to require too much engagement. For example, right now I'm reading a book called The Tar Heel Traveler before bed. It's a nice little collection of stories on interesting people, places, and things around North Carolina. It's the kind of book that's easily broken down into short sections. It's also very light in its subject matter. It's not like, say, reading Plato, where I have to take every line and ask what does this mean in the greater context of both Plato's writing as a whole and in the cultural and historical context of ancient Greece. Or it's not like reading a science or mathematics textbook, where you're going to have to keep loads of facts and formula in mind while you're reading it. And those are my tips for establishing a reading habit before bed. And all of these have been my tips for reading. What do you think about them? Have you tried any of these yourself? And if so, please let me know. Do you have any other tips that I did not mention that you think are very helpful? Please let me know in the comments below. And if I get enough, I may do a second video on this. But regardless, I hope you found this video insightful. Reading has become a great joy for me. It's became a sanctuary of peace for me in my life, and it's also became something that has really greatly enriched it. And I hope these tips can help you establish reading. And I wish you much success in your endeavors. And with that, we'll call the video here, fam. Special thanks to Fran, who does a wonderful job of doing my art. A special thanks to all of my friends on Twitter. I wouldn't be here without you all. And a special thanks to all of you for watching this video. Please like this video if you like it. Dislike it if you dislike it. But if you dislike it, please leave me a comment below and let me know why you dislike it so I can improve myself and I can be a better Big Mike. And also, if you like my videos, please subscribe and turn your notifications on. Until next time, fam, remember, just be yourself and you'll be awesome. Peace out!